Hi everyone, happy Halloween to all those who celebrate it. Thank you so much for being with us this special edition of Technicolor in cooperation with Be Live for Black History Month. My name is Gloria Odongo, she, her and hers, and I am a HIV prevention and testing coordinator at Positive East. And tonight I'm here with our fabulous guests, Rico Jacob Chace, he, him and his, and Jailen Chapple, they, them and theirs. As many of you know, Technicolor is a monthly LGBT film night, and it was started by my colleague Massimo, and it used to be hosted in Redbridge Central Library. And the idea was to provide the LGBT plus community in Redbridge a much needed safe space to get together, to be themselves. And when COVID-19 struck earlier on in the year, the idea was, it was decided to make the film night an online program. So every second Monday of the month, it's a live event that happens on our Facebook page. And from this month as well, you can watch it on our website without having to connect to Facebook. Let me tell you a bit about Positive Ease for those who don't know. We are London's biggest community-based HIV charity. We provide support for people living with and affected by HIV. And those are for people who are accessing care in East London or obviously who live in East London. Some of our services include counselling, group activities, welfare and benefit advice, and we also provide free HIV and STI testing, free condoms and sexual health advice to those in East London. So obviously at the minute, we're not doing any face-to-face testing, and we have moved all of our services online. So we're offering remote testing. So we're supporting people with testing via Teams. So they get a test delivered to their home, and one of my colleagues would be on the other side, and then we can support them with doing the test from the comfort of their own home. In order to access these services, you can go on our website, www.positiveeast.org.uk, or you can give us a call on 0207 791 2855. And yeah, so the film that we're going to be discussing this month is called Disclosure, and it's a documentary, a new documentary on Netflix, and it looks at Hollywood's depiction of transgender people and the impact this has had on American culture. And as I've mentioned earlier, we've got the fabulous Rico and the fabulous Jailen joining us to discuss it. So how about you introduce yourselves and we can get started. So Jailen, tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah, of course. So I'm calling in from California, and a little bit of my background. I was previously an intern at Positive East in January, so like in the beginning of this year, January to around March, right before COVID struck. And I recently graduated with my degree in social work. And so while I was getting my degree, I basically did some research on how homelessness impacts LGBT youth. And so really like my work is centered around LGBT youth experiencing homelessness and also like sexual health.
Oh, nice, fantastic. And Rico?
Hi, my name is Rico Jacob Chace. I'm a director at TransActual UK. So at TransActual, we have different strategy groups. So one of them is in media focus, one of them is to do with like medical care, taking feedback from the community and sort of tackling certain things like GP interactions. And the last is legislative. So right now we're reviewing UK legislation to see if we can incorporate non-binary people into that. So it's a sort of political project. So next time we have those sort of discussions, we have the information in place, like the hypothetical situations closed up. I also do a lot of documentary films. So I did a documentary film that actually came out today called Black Rainbow, and that's reviewing the intersectionality between being Black and queer. So in my case, Black and trans, and how does that impact our sort of quality of life, day-to-day, mental health, those sort of discussions. I produced a radio show called Against Racism in the UK. So that's a sort of 9-part racism show. And we have like sections such as police brutality, stop and search, institutional racism, and also my personal favorite, the LGBTQIA plus community. Gotta get that intersectionality conversation in there. So yeah, I've kind of like become an activist in that space. I kind of got into that setting because I experienced homophobia and transphobia when I was working in finance. So I've just kind of okay, that something needs to change. We actually need to get some sort of improvement there. So that's how I got into activism.
Fantastic. And is there any way we can watch that documentary, or will it be released on any platforms?
It's out on YouTube right now under Real Stories. So if you go on the Real Stories YouTube page, if you search for Black Rainbow, it will come up.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you. So let's just get started. What did both of you think about the documentary?
You can go ahead.
No, you go first.
Yeah, so I really liked the documentary. I've watched it a couple of times, but when it first came out, me and like all of my close friends, we actually got together and watched it like on a big screen. And I think that one, it highlighted like the kind of like the exclusion within like the LGBT community. So with there being like the lesbian, gay, so basically like the sexuality portion, and then like the gender portion, I feel like it highlighted that really well. And I think it taught me a lot in terms of like the history of transness. So before like even watching the documentary, I feel like there's not really a lot of history or even like research on like transness, people coming up as trans, and then me discovering that I was trans, like growing up. I felt like there was not really like a lot of documentaries or even like shows that I could watch to connect with my elders. And so, and all in all, I really love the documentary, and like the message that was presented, and even just everything about the documentary, honestly.
No, definitely. I totally agree. I watched it for the first time earlier this week and I was blown away. I think also things like there's quite a few like, it highlighted quite a lot of things in like the media that some of us sort of don't acknowledge or we don't realize are offensive. There was a few things. There was a lady who spoke about every time she was an actress, and she said every time she was given a role, she'd be put as a sex worker. And she understood. She said, well, a lot of trans women are sex workers, but a lot of these programs don't highlight why a lot of them are sex workers. It just sort of just naturally put me in those roles, and it was really important because when you think about it, it is really true. But sometimes I think we don't see it, or we don't recognize, or it's not spoken about, which was really important as well. Rico, what did you think about the documentary?
I think especially when it comes to media, people that have the powers that be, that own these companies that produce shows, they tend to be cis and they tend to be white. So they tend to create a dialogue that they think their audience is going to be interested, or it's going to captivate, or it's going to get views, etc. And then I understand the thought process. It's like, oh, maybe we could make this person, it'll be super interesting, exciting. But it is incredibly damaging for myself or anyone in the trans community to watch that. And it's also damaging because it creates this negative persona and perceptions. And considering as a minority group, we're like fighting to get basic recognition of jobs, or fighting against hate crime and violence, it would be good if the media outlets actually started portraying positive messages for our community. And yeah, I mean, I didn't realize that trans being portrayed in media for the length of time that it had. I don't know. I think because I kind of just, because in the UK, it's not taught in schools. The LGBT community is not taught in schools, and that's due to Margaret Thatcher's government removing it from the curriculum after the AIDS pandemic, because I thought that it would be dangerous to encourage anyone to go into that community. So you have generation after generation of people who have grown up not understanding it and thinking it's taboo. So yeah, I mean, a lot of people there, so when I was in the 16th, 17th, I saw people on the TV, I'm like, I didn't even see any of these films. So you are 100% making it up as you go along. And in a way, it does make you feel like quote unquote weird, because you haven't seen it, and then you feel like you're the only person, like 80% of people haven't seen trans people. I had to go find them. I had to go to a TRIA on queer or non-binary space specifically to find them. So yeah, there's a lot there, but I definitely think that the negative perception of media definitely needs to change.
Yeah, but I think the whole way they portrayed, I think the whole way the documentary was shot was really educational. I think, as you said, it was a very good learning tool for a lot of people who were unaware of things like, as you said, the history, the way it can be damaging, the way trans people are portrayed in media. And I think also when they spoke about non-binary people being erased, as in you don't see many portrayals of non-binary people in media. So they had some very, very important conversations, which was really nice to hear.
And like what the documentary was telling me, the documentary itself was amazing. Like I literally 100% love Laverne Cox and all the people that contributed to creating it. And it has such a powerful message. And especially when you have that trans woman that was, I guess, hiding for her entire career. And she was like, oh my God, I went to an interview and I actually told them that I was trans. I think that kind of resonated with a lot of people, even myself. So I'm thinking about going back into finance, and I'm like, crap, do I tell them? Do I not? I mean, is there going to be like a surprise, a surprise firing, surprise firing? Like, it's something that all of us have to think about. And it's because society is not accustomed to us as individuals in professional settings, because they kind of see us as these caricatures in films or in Psycho. That was Alfred Hitchcock has an explaining to do.
Yeah, that was very bizarre. And is there anything you found surprising, Jailen, when you watched the documentary?
I think that one thing that I really found surprising was how, I don't know, like, I guess how, like, when, I'm sorry, like my thoughts are like escaping me, but honestly, I feel like I'm trying to go back to like my initial, like the first time that I watched it, because I've watched it like a couple of times. But I think that every time that I do end up watching it, I'm just really enamored by like how the documentary was like portraying like the history, like really like the surprising part for me was seeing that trans people existed in like the early 1900s, which shouldn't be surprising because trans people have always been here. But really the portrayal of like trans bodies like in the 1900s or even like in the 50s, I think seeing that, because like it's not really widely talked about, was like initially surprising for me. Like the first time that I did see it.
Oh yeah, I can totally agree. Rico, is anything you found surprising with the documentary?
I think similar to Jailen, I didn't realize that there was an openly trans woman. I think like after the Second World War, like a GI that was doing performing and on stage, and so people were sitting in the audience clapping and not like throwing tomatoes as we would expect, because we have so much internalized transphobia that it's very, very scary in order to encounter this. But for people to be on front covers of magazine publications or on Afro-Caribbean like hair products, but you just didn't know that person was trans. It's almost as if we've been there, but we just haven't had the comfort to be extremely open about it. But I think as that trans woman who had like a career and literally just came out recently publicly, as she was saying, is that what have my children done? Like the children were sort of taken over, like, and I think that's it's quite a powerful message. And but I think someone else in the documentary mentioned that it can turn at any point. That, you know, we kind of see this as progression, but all it takes is one Trump rally and then everything sort of rollbacks, or Trump in the US, Boris Johnson in the UK, for that to sort of roll back to where it was before. So yeah, it is a bit dangerous. I think the point that really resonated with me is that even though you have the sort of powerhouse of trans individuals that lies who are getting better and progressing, if their activism initiates hate in a viewer, they don't have access to those individuals, so they don't actually attack them. They attack, you know, you and me on the streets, as we're just sort of going by our daily lives. So representation is good, but at the same time it can be counterintuitive. But that's not to say we're not going to keep going. We're definitely going to keep going.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, I think one thing I found surprising was there was a gentleman, I think it was Zeke Smith, and he was talking about how he loved watching Ace Ventura growing up. and then he watched it again when he was in college, and he was in the process of transitioning, and it hit me like a ton of bricks, because I felt like, even though I watched the film, I didn't realize how damaging those portrayals of trans people in the media, could be on people, especially if you're somebody who is going through a transition. I can only imagine how negative that must have been, seeing that on your screen, especially if it's a film or something that you really enjoyed, but obviously in a later stage of your life you watch it again. And it made me feel quite bad, because I was like, I've enjoyed this film, and I've never ever once thought about how negative they portray people. And yeah, it made me think a lot more about things that I'm watching, what's the themes that are going on in those things, and how they're portraying different parts of the community. So that surprised me a bit when watching
Bug
that.
Bunny transphobia part. I was just like, oh my god, seriously, it's a cartoon. Do you have to teach it to the babies too? Like,
but it's sad because it's ingrained in all. It just showed us it's ingrained in all areas of media, and it's often quite subtle, so you don't really notice it. But when you look at it properly, it's staring at you right in the face. And it was quite shocking.
I had like the same realization that Zeke had when I like rewatched Mrs. Doubtfire, which is something that I watched growing up, and then I like watched it again. I was like, this is not like portrayed in like a good way. But as a child, I was just like laughing at it, but I didn't know that, or kind of like realize that it was transphobic when I was growing up. So
yeah, no, definitely. No, it was
laughable. Laverne Cox saying that when she was in the ice stage of transitioning, she wasn't she wasn't like going out as a caricature, she was going out as a person transitioning, and then she gets on the train and she gets laughed at. And that kind of definitely is a thing. Which is concerning.
Did you think that was linked to the portrayal of trans people in things like comedy? Like there was a skit there where I think it was Jamie Foxx, when he was with somebody else, I can't remember who he was with, and he'd asked that person to put a dress on, and then they'd removed the dress, and they'd seen that their genital area had changed, and it was supposed to be funny, but I didn't get it. I really didn't.
Yeah, that was very, very cringeworthy for me. I think for most people, to be honest with you. I think when you watch it when you're a kid and you're not really aware of political correctness, and you sort of grow up and you become more aware of what people are trying to do or trying to portray in these things, and it becomes something more concerning. Like Big Mama's House, I didn't watch that. Didn't like white chicks, She's a Man, all of these are kind of questionable when you sort of look at it from a different light.
It was really interesting.
And I think
the L Word, oh my god, that was terrible.
Oh, the L Word, oh my gosh, I can't even like watch like the old version, because that was just terrible. Like what, like they were just misgendering him throughout like the entire show even.
So just for recap, so they had like a trans guy coming on to the L Word, and he was transitioning on the show, and hormone replacement therapy, you do feel different, your body's changing. But he was portrayed as some sort of aggressor, like he became really, really toxic masculinity and controlling. It's like, we got the first one, and he's this. I think someone mentioned in the documentary that it would be okay if you had like so many different trans portrayals, and then one of them was this sort of abusive, twisted, psycho characteristic. But because we have so few, it's incredibly damaging that this would be the reference point for the entire community.
Yeah, I totally agree. And how would you say the documentary made you feel, Jailen? Is there any emotions that you'd say that it brought up, or when you watched it?
I feel like when I watched it, I felt sadness, but then also happiness. Like kind of a combination of a bunch of feelings. Like happiness that we have this documentary to reference, to go back to be able to highlight how media has portrayed transness like in a negative light, but then also sadness because transness has been portrayed in like a laughable, just like in just a really negative light throughout history. So it's kind of like a mix of emotions, like while I was watching it, like sadness because like this is like when I first came out as trans, like people were afraid for me because of like bullying or just like my existence, but then this is what they've like seen throughout like history, so that they didn't really have like any other like reference of trans joy. So like sadness, but then also happiness that we have something to reference so that we can be better like in the future when it comes to documentary filmmaking or but like trans portrayal like in media.
No, I totally agree. Rico, how did you feel watching the documentary?
I kind of limit my exposure to sort of anything that I think is a little bit triggering or jarring, because it just, you're trying to just get through what everyone else is getting through, like COVID and the rest of it, and then you have to sort of deal with the extra trans element of it, and it does get a bit exhausting. So I personally felt watching the entire, I think it's 2 hour documentary, did feel by the end of it, I was like, oh my God, like, what else did they do? Because some of the perceptions are just really bad. Like the fact that someone put that to paper is I don't know, it is, I guess not hurtful, it's just insensitive. It's just incredibly insensitive. But I guess media people are there to make money, but I feel the same way about some of the negative portrayals of like Black people in media. I don't understand why you will only show boys in the hood, but you won't show, I don't know, a Black guy going to university. Like, why is it always this? It's the same cultural appropriation, but I think it's even worse for trans people because they weren't a character or a dialogue who just so happened to be trans. It was like their entire identity, or they would be like murdered. I think with a trans woman, they were like, yeah, I've been killed so many times, I can't even remember. Like someone got killed twice in 1 week from 2 different TV series. Like, just get a bit more original. But I think there also was a measure of hope. Like, it was very, very clear how things had improved slowly but surely. So sad and happy at the same time.
Yeah, it was nice to see there was an older trans woman who spoke about how far, I think one of you mentioned it previously, who spoke about how far things have come, how things have changed. And I think there was also a woman who spoke about, I think there was another documentary that was spoken about in there called, I think it was I Am Kate. And she spoke about the dad who was saying that he is, he's so proud and he's so happy to live, to be living at home with his trans child, who I think he called a unicorn. And I think this woman was so shocked about that, because she never experienced that growing up. Which was really interesting to see. And I think also there was a conversation where I think Laverne Cox and somebody else went on to a talk show, and the questions that the Katie asked the woman were really personal. And I think the way the woman responded, she articulated herself so nicely, and explained to her that I'm not here to talk about my private parts because they're private. You wouldn't ask somebody else such personal questions. And I think it showed how people are, in some spaces, people are trying to learn and educate themselves about the way we speak to certain groups of the community and things like that. So I mean, in the documentary, Laverne Cox spoke about, she said 80% of cisgendered Americans have never met a transgender person face to face. And I mean, together with the way transgender people are portrayed on screen, do we feel like this contributes to the stigma faced by transgender people on a daily basis?
I feel like it does contribute, but then I feel like even like in my own personal interactions, I've had people that I've met who have told me that I'm the first non-binary person that they've ever met. And I feel like the lack of representation in the media, the negative representation, and then people like just not meeting like trans folks also plays a part into that. So I shouldn't be the first non-binary person that like someone has met, because then like their conception of what a non-binary person looks like, which non-binary people look different, like we look completely different from one another and have different experiences than one another. I think that also like plays a factor into that too. So like the 80% of not ever meeting a trans person and then also not ever meeting like a non-binary person, I feel like that plays like a negative factor into how people are thinking that trans people are like living every day.
No, definitely, I totally agree. And Rico, what did you think?
I think it's a bit of an excuse, to be honest with you. I don't really think that just because you haven't met someone who's trans or non-binary, that it gives you an excuse to incite hate. Like I can understand if you have questions. Like whenever I meet people, they always like, oh, so how does that work? I don't mind the curiosity. I'd be like, okay, I'm going to answer your questions, but you can't ask most trans people about this because it's personal. You should be talking about genitals. But because I'm a public spokesperson, I'm happy in this particular instance to answer your questions, but just acknowledge that it is a very, very personal thing for everyone involved. But I don't think that just because you haven't met a trans person that you have a right to incite hate speech or violent murder and all the rest of it. So I understand the 80% lack of understanding, that I'll give you. But the hate, nah, I'm sorry. I don't, just because I had hypothetically say I haven't met a Native American, doesn't mean I can go up to a Native American and attack them. That's just, it's an excuse. And people make these excuses because they consider us to be subhuman. So there was a lot of instances. So say, for example, when they were talking, that section where Sylvia Rivera was talking at that protest after Stonewall and addressing the community, saying that Stonewall was started by our community and that we really, really should be coming together and fighting. And then after that speech, Sylvia Rivera actually fell into depression, and after Marsha P. Johnson was actually, sorry if I'm triggering anyone, was actually murdered, her case was actually left unsolved. Sorry. Yeah, it was a cold case effectively. And that was because at the time, a lot of the police weren't investigating murders of trans women because it was like, oh, you know, it happens quite a lot, or it's understandable, or I understand why someone would be surprised and kill a gay person or a trans person. It's ridiculous. And Sylvia Rivera, after having started the gay movement, and all the rights that have been afforded us today were started by her, she was living homeless by the Hudson River, and that was in the documentary, which is also on Netflix. So people tend to glorify people and use them as martyrs, but they really, really forget the origins and the fact that if you perceive someone as subhuman, they have nothing to lose, so that they are the ones who are fighting harder. And I just really hate the idea that just because I haven't met you, it means I can be abusive or derogatory to you. I'm not buying that. I think that for us would be a self-love, self-confidence point. You know, same way you're saying to people, apply for the job because there's 5 white people in there who are doing it and they're not qualified. It's the same thing for trans. Like, accept rights, you know, accept that you shouldn't be abused because you are worth more. You are worth love. I think that's a very important distinction to make.
No, definitely. But I think, I mean, in regards to everything we've spoken about so far, I think that's why it's even more damaging that we have these negative portrayals of members of the trans community and the non-binary community in the media. And I think, as you mentioned before, when we spoke about negative portrayals of like the Black community as well, they're very damaging, because if that's all you've seen, if you haven't met somebody, a lot of it can be seen as ignorance. I'm not excusing the behavior, but I think, you know, a lot of it can be seen as ignorance as well. If you haven't seen or met a group of people, it doesn't excuse you. But if that's all you see, I think also members of those community can struggle with self-love as well, because if that's all they're constantly seeing of themselves, you know, it could be seen as a self-fulfilling prophecy. If when you open the TV, all you ever see is negative portrayals of yourself, you're going to think, okay, well, if everybody, you know, thinks that of me already, you know, I could fulfill those, you know, those thoughts of people. So yeah, I mean, as we've just spoken about, how transgender individuals are ridiculed and treated not very nicely by cisgendered heterosexual men, and often, as we mentioned before, non-binary individuals can be are often completely ignored. I mean, also, how do you think other members of the LGBT community can become better allies to their non-binary siblings and to members of the transgender community?
I say first and foremost, like, respect people's pronouns. Like, if someone tells you what their pronouns are, then use their pronouns. If you make a mistake, then like correct yourself and then keep it pushing. And then I would say secondly, also, if you don't know someone's pronouns, like, don't assume anyone's pronouns ever. But if you don't know their pronouns and it's just some like one on the street, then try to use gender neutral pronouns until you're able to like ask that person their pronouns. So first, don't misgender people, and then also like ask their pronouns. I think that's like a good way to even like begin this gender conversation. But then also thirdly, just respect people like as they are. Like, if someone tells you who they are, then accept that, and like don't ask people like inappropriate questions, I say.
Good advice. Rico?
Most of my chosen family, I'll just open with it, most of my chosen family are actually LGB. So when it comes to the support network that I'm familiar with, it comes from people that aren't necessarily part of the trans community, because they're just accustomed to just, in a way, adopting individuals and saying, oh, I can keep you going. Like I was at the Black Lives Matter protest, and I was really, really nervous about holding a Black Trans Lives Matter sign, because I was just like, I'm going to out myself surrounded by loads of Black people. And I was like, it's too much of a cross section of literally everyone in the community for it not to be risky. You don't know what's going to happen. And I didn't have the confidence to do it, but my chosen sister did. So she brought me the flag and she brought me the sign, and I was holding it in Parliament Square on the podium next to Churchill, you know, actually being proud of who I am. So there are a lot of allies, but then there's always there's always exceptions, right? So I think in the UK, I'm not sure if it's the same in the US, we have radical feminists, and there's also an LGB group, and they are actively campaigning against trans people. And I mean, for life of me, I don't quite understand it. I've tried, you know, you try and understand people's perceptions so you can sort of have an educated conversation to amend it. I don't personally understand it. I think it may be to do with the overall hierarchy within society. And even if you don't really want to acknowledge it, it is a little bit there. At the very, very top is the white straight man, and at the very, very bottom is the Black trans woman. And I think for the LGBT community, it's like, oh, well, you know, I may be gay, I may get those stereotypes or that persecution, but at least I'm not that, you know, I'm not the same as them. So I don't know, I think, excuse the expression, but the shit rolls downhill. So I think there is some instances where the LGBT community is not necessarily understanding us or refusing to understand us. But then there's a lot of supportive people in the community. I've had conversations recently, as Jailen said, about non-binary and respecting pronouns, like regardless of whether it's new to you or you don't quite understand it. Well, how does that happen? I mean, I'm quite happy to explain to you the history of gender being a spectrum and sexuality being a spectrum happened across all different cultures across the world, and that colonialism destroyed it. I'm happy to explain that to you. You as an individual should know to respect other people, to respect their wishes. I think that's really important. Yeah, basic respect.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I mean, this is a question for you, Jailen. You've spent time in the UK here, and obviously now you're living in the US. In your experiences, have you noticed any differences between the way transgender and non-binary people are treated in the UK and how they're treated in the US?
Yeah, so I think that I honestly didn't really experience any differences. I feel like they're really like the same when it came to the US and the UK, because we're still living within the Western like colonial conceptions of gender. So I felt like personally it was similar when I went over to the UK than being over here in the US when it came to being trans and being non-binary in the UK, and just like experiencing people like using my pronouns or like misgendering me. So I felt like it was very, very different, like very similar, and that I didn't really see like any differences.
Okay, that makes sense. Rico, have you had the pleasure of visiting America? I think you're on mute.
I've been to the US, but I look like a girl then, so I don't have. I'm actually glad that you're asking that question because I saw that one before. I was like, I have no idea.
That's fair enough. I mean, also in the
a rise in populism in the US with like Trump just directly discriminating against members of that community, we are seeing something similar in the UK. So it is, we're all kind of concerned and looking at politics at the same time. But I think, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it may be slightly worse politically with the whole Trump space because the East Anglo.
Yeah, like over the past couple of years, it's gotten a lot worse. But it really depends on like what part of the country you're in when it comes to like gender expression. So before I was like living in Florida, which is like in the South. So it's a lot, it's really different in terms of being like out and people using your pronouns, whereas like I feel like in California, they're a little bit more like they'll acknowledge your pronouns and at least try like attempt to use them. But Florida was like in the deep South, so it's more like Bible Belt type of thing.
Okay, wow. Yeah, I mean, also in the film, there's a bit of footage with Sylvia Costa, and she's at New York Pride, and there's a bit of a conversation around how trans men are seen as traitors of the feminist cause. And I remember there's a line in there, I'm not sure if it was from a movie as well, where you know, I think the lady said to the gentleman, you can be the butchest lesbian, or you know, something around that conversation, you can be the butchest lesbian, but you shouldn't give up your, there was something, but it wasn't a nice scene. And I mean, how in your opinion, how would you think this impacts the mental health of transgender non-binary individuals being seen as traitors, as per se? I mean, we spoke about the radical feminists, we touched upon that a bit earlier. Yeah, do you have any thoughts on that?
That particular interaction was in the old L Word series. That was Max, the trans guy. It came out. It was one of the queer ladies' sisters that was like a LGBT ally having that conversation. So she was a straight person talking to a trans guy. I think that's probably, I don't know, just mind your business. First comment. Oh, do I feel like a traitor to? I think of all the things that are on my mind right now. Feeling like a traitor to women is nowhere near on the list. Probably doesn't even get there, to be honest with you. Just because I'm a trans guy doesn't necessarily mean I don't think women are goddesses. I have so much respect for the strength, femininity. Sorry for background noise. Like the overall femininity and just the sheer willpower, but that doesn't mean that I don't know I'm not a trans guy. So it's a different conversation. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough.
Jailen? I feel
Jailen?
like for me, like existing as a non-binary person, I think like I like resonate with what he said. Like I don't feel like that applies to me, but then I also like recognize that there are TERFs, at least that's what we call them out here in the US, that that try to erase, I feel like, trans people's like experiences. And so I know that there's a group of, I don't know, I don't remember if they're lesbians, but there's also like people that try to erase when trans men were like living, how do I say, like their experiences when they had not transitioned yet. And so I think that that's also something that we need to acknowledge, like that people shouldn't erase like anyone's experience, but I think that I don't resonate with, like I uphold and uplift women. And so I don't, yeah, I don't resonate with that.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, I mean, in the documentary, Laverne Cox points out that in her childhood, when she was, when she realized that she was trans, the only people that she saw on screen, or the only references she had, were Black men dressed as women, as a means of emasculating them, to make them less threatening. I mean, in either of your opinions, is there any other challenges that you feel that transgender or non-binary people of color face in their life that may not be experienced by other groups? I mean, I know Rico mentioned the hierarchy before of at the top you have white cisgendered men, and at the bottom you'd have black trans black trans and non-binary people. What challenges do you feel like they face in the community? Obviously there's racism as well. Is there any other struggles you feel that they have?
So my background is economics. So if you look at it from an economics perspective, if you're looking at trans people feeling uncomfortable, say for example, you're in A-levels, that's probably the moment where you kind of explore your gender and your sexuality if you haven't done so already. So if you're having anxiety and depression about your gender and sexuality, you're not focusing on your A-levels or GCSEs or colleges it would be in the UK. So you're not really focusing on your career. Everyone knows that if you go into further education, your income goes up by 40% on average. I'm not saying you need to go to degree to get an income, but it definitely does help. So if you can't finish further education because transphobia or homophobia, or you can't get a job, or you can't get private healthcare, or you don't have, you're basically effectively homeless because your family kicks you out. There's a lot of different factors that eventually can't compartmentalize to a short life expectancy. If someone from the street hasn't attacked you, putting it delicately, the death rate for trans women is ridiculous. Life expectancy in the US, I think, is 35. We don't even have the statistics for the UK. So it's just a lot of factors that just generally just compartmentalize into just poor quality of life, effectively. And I like to say that those factors are exclusive to trans and non-binary people. They're not. We just experience it to a greater extent. And then if you add on the whole homophobia and transphobia in the Black community, you're basically dealing with an intersectional nightmare. So our communities inherited a lot of transphobia from colonialism. Also, sodomy was used as a form of punishment during slavery. So a lot of Caribbean, a lot of African people, they've basically forgotten their cultural history, and they have this severe hate, which has just been brought on from the environment that we've been raised in. And we're kind of getting to the point where we're addressing racism. If you take the example of India, a lot of the laws that they're taking out of India right now were put in during colonialism. So it's basically just undoing what's being done, but the damage is done. And the individuals on the ground are not going to know the legal history. So effectively, it's just a cocktail for disaster, especially if you're Black and trans women, even more so.
Mm-hmm. Jailen, do you have
Yeah,
anything?
I think that he hit it on the head with that. Like, when it comes to intersectionality, you really have to, like, that's the thing with intersectionality, is you're having multiple marginalized identities like all at once. And so really, I think it's the compounding factors of not knowing if you're experiencing homophobia, transphobia, racism, or maybe all three at the same time. And so that just plays a factor into like the everyday life of trans, like people of color and trans Black people.
Fantastic. And the final question from us, By the way, if anybody has any questions, feel free to type them on the box, and we'll try and answer them. As somebody who's not part of, the transgender community or the non-binary community, how would you suggest we educate ourselves to be more aware and more supportive? Is there any material you think would be good to read? Any other documentaries or anything else we can, read and watch to make ourselves more supportive?
I have a book, so Beyond the Gender Binary by Alok Menon. It's a pretty good book. I've read it. Like it's a really short read, but it's good for youth, good for adults to read. But it basically breaks down like how the gender system currently is a binary system, and that we should live outside of the binary system. I think that also just following trans and non-binary people of color in media, so Instagram, Twitter, I found a lot of my chosen family like within my friends, but then also within Twitter, and being able to connect with, like, I think the internet is like a powerful source because I've been able to connect with people across the country and then also across the world of not necessarily seeing other Black trans people and especially Black trans mass people. So Twitter was a source for me, but for people that are not trans and not non-binary, following these accounts, and just having the basically everyday, like hearing trans voices and uplifting trans voices, I think that's like that goes a long way in itself. So basically just listening and hearing and uplifting trans voices. And when a trans person says something, believe them, and uplift their voice. Don't try to talk over them or overpower them.
Thank you so much. Rico?
Yeah, that point is really important. You know, if you want to hear from a Black woman, find a Black woman. don't find someone who's had a chat with a Black woman. It's not really not the same. But yeah, Stonewall is a good place to start if you have a corporation and you want to have corporation like training, like diversity training. I think they do with schools. They also do some legal work as well, so they're a good one to follow. For children, Mermaids does a lot when it comes to gender non-binary children. I work for TransActual UK, so we do a lot in the political space when it comes to like leafleting and like legislation, that sort of stuff. But to be honest with you, there's loads of trans activists. If you watch a documentary and you think someone's interesting, literally just give them a follow. And by following them, don't worry, you'll find about 10 because we all hang out together. So just avoid the cis until we really need to. But yeah, no, there's quite a lot. There's a plethora of information out there. If you have a question about, even if you want to answer a surgery question to a trans person, don't ask Google. Google has loads of information. To be honest, there's literally so much out there that you can kind of just use to educate yourself. But I do think Instagram and Twitter is like a good place to start. And you won't just necessarily be seeing the person as an individual. They'll be posting like the ongoing political discussions, and you'll kind of understand it a bit more. Like in the UK, we have the Gender Recognition Act reform. A lot of people don't even know what that means. It effectively means that if I want to tell people that I'm a man, I shouldn't have to go to a doctor and spend like, God knows, 600 quid to get it in paper and then hand it in and say, oh, look, now I'm a man. Like I know who I am. It's those sort of discussions. And to get a little bit more perspective and understanding of the community, and it won't just be purely based on pose, which is great, but it's not who we are. You know, we're just ordinary people with our business, and we just want the same rights as everyone else.
Thank you so much. And yeah, that's all from us here. I'd like to thank you both so much for joining us. We've had some great discussion. And yeah, I mean, for me closing, I'd recommend everybody watch the documentary itself. It's on Netflix and it's called Disclosure. It's about nearly 2 hours long, but it is fantastic. And just a quick reminder, if anybody needs a HIV or STI test, free condoms, sexual health advice, if they're living with or affected by HIV and they'd like to access our services, they can get in contact with us at www.positiveeast.org.uk. And Technicolor will be back again next month, and this will be a special event dedicated to World AIDS Day on Monday the 30th of November at 6 p.m. And we'll be showing a short film, our short film, called 30 Days of Living with HIV, and our fabulous director Mark Santos and other amazing panelists from Positive East will be talking about the history of Positive East and what the charity is doing for communities in East London. And that's all from us. Thank you so much again, Jailen and Rico. And yeah, enjoy the rest of your evening, everyone.
Thank you to Gloria and Positive East for organising this.
Yeah, and thank you for having me and bringing us into the space.
No, thank you.